Let's solve this inequality equation. And as you can tell, I already have 0 on one side, which is what I want. So what I'm going to do is graph the non-negative side. So I'm going to go to y equals, and I've already got it typed in. Notice I put the numerators and denominators inside parentheses. Then I hit graph. Now we need to look at a couple things. The first thing is, notice this horizontal line, it doesn't actually need to be there, neither does that one. And if you look at the table, it's going to tell you that. Because at -5 we get an error. And at +5 we also get an error. And that's because the denominator, when you have a 5 here, x is 5, you get 0 on the bottom. And for this x, if you put a -5 in, you get 0 on the bottom. So you can't have 0 on the bottom, so that means that x equals 5 is not part of the solution, that vertical line. So when I draw it in my graph, I'm going to use a dotted line just to show you that. And same thing for x equals 5. It's a broken line. Now the last thing I need to find is that where it's crossing the x-axis. Looks like it's at 0, 0, so we can look at our table to verify that. And it is at 0, 0. So that's another critical value. So we have 3 critical values, -5, 0, and 5. That's going to be used to help us to determine the solution. Now, when I draw this, it's approaching the x-axis and it's approaching that vertical line, that dotted line, but never ever gets to either one of them. And the same thing in the middle. It approaches both sides, but never ever gets to them. And the same thing up here. It approaches, but never gets to them. Now the last thing I need to realize is that above the x-axis is greater than 0, on the x-axis is equal to 0, and below the x-axis is less than 0. Since this equation is less than or equal to 0, I don't need to look up here or there, because that's where it's greater than 0, so I don't want to look at that. I just need to write the solution set for this region, for this part of the curve, and this part of the curve. So start here. It comes from -infinity. And we never include infinity, so -infinity. And it gets closer and closer to -5 and starts curving down, but never ever gets to it. And so, since that's also an asymptote, it doesn't exist, I use parentheses. Then I have another region, so I use a union. Now that 0 is included in the solution because it's equals to it also. Not just less than, but equals to 0. So that's where it equals 0, where the y value is 0, is at x equals 0. So I include that by using a bracket, 0. And it gets closer and closer to 5, but never ever gets there. So I use a 5 that doesn't look like a 5. So let's make it look like a 5. With the parentheses, because it's not included, it's asymptote. And that's actually a solution. Now there's one other thing we can do just to verify. I can actually type in less than or equals to by using second math, which is the test key, and throwing in a 0, then graph it. If you look at it, it looks like it's coming from -infinity to -5 and then 0 to +5. The only question is you got to make sure that those are zeros and 5s and -5s and if they're included or not. That's why we need to look at both graphs. But this is kind of a way to check it.